Hi, Nikki. Welcome to the Cosmic Heartist podcast. I am super excited to have you here. I would love if we could start with you sharing a little bit about you and your story. As I was sharing with you before we started recording, I got really pulled into your page and the work that you do when I saw that you work with the wild woman archetype and women who run with the wolves. And I mean, that's work that I believe so deeply in. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what you do.
All right. Hi, Karina. It's so nice to be here too and finally chatting with you about this. About myself, I don't even know where to start, but maybe just in relation to the women's work, right? So I'm Nikki. I am by profession, I guess you can call me an environmental scientist, but I'm also an ecologist. Basically, that means somebody who studies relationships, systems, and while my training had, my training really encouraged me to look at the relationships within nature. I think on a personal level and on a personal note, there was a time in my life where I guess I was living out this life that I thought I was meant to live, or at least, maybe sometimes we're conditioned to live. And it got to a point where the story that I was living with no longer worked for me. And I felt that I was stuck in a place where I didn't really know. I didn't have so many examples of who to follow, what to do, what are the different things that I can try to take into my life to maybe put more meaning into it and find more purpose. And that's really how I found my way into studying the wild woman archetype through that book that I know we'll be discussing a little bit later. But yeah, so I think just my passions. I love nature. I love the ocean, really. I feel like I have a very deep connection with it, and I think it's because I was privileged enough to grow up witnessing nature conservation. My family are caretakers of an island in the south of the Philippines where I grew up, and I really saw the fruits really of community work. Um, how do you try and come in to protect something that you love, but also make sure that everything around it, the people around it, the communities around it, are also benefiting and thriving from this. And I think that's what kind of inspired me to go down into the environmental route. But and then coming into, like, right now I work in a corporate space, and I really do feel the disconnect that we have, and I feel like that reflects really into our own disconnection with ourselves, right? The disconnection from nature. And I think this is where the work that I do comes in. I'm also a yoga instructor, although I haven't really taught that in a while. Although the yoga practice has also kind of helped me to really ground and root in these principles. So happy to be here.
Super happy to have you here. And I think that's such a fascinating, um, I want to say like irony that you grew up in, an island and then here you are now in the city and working in corporate. And I want to ask a question that maybe isn't as common as a question, but what is your favorite thing about working in corporate?
I get a routine to my
Mm.
days in a sense. Oh, so, I know that you love and talk also about astrology. So I'm a Virgo through and through. My son is Virgo, and I think I thrive in environments where I know, or at least I know that there are certain things that I get to do in the course of a day, right? That said, my own schedule as a corporate, because I'm a sustainability advocate still. So even though I work in a corporate setting, I work from home most of the
Mm.
time. So at least I still have that schedule of like 8:30 to 5 a.m. 8:30 to 5 p.m. But I get to take, holidays. I get to be able to spend time with my family, spend time with my dogs, do other things that I love.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that is pretty good. Well, I guess it's a trade-off. A lot of people say that when you're in corporate, it's like your life kind of gets, work-life balance is a little bit difficult. But I'd like to actually say that, sometimes if you do have the right practice and the right environment, then I think it can also be a way to actually allow you to have more freedom. And for me, I have the freedom to do the other things that I love through my corporate job. So
I love that. I am thinking about how, the last time I was working properly in an office setting, I was working with my dad, and it was a family business, but my dad
Mhm.
treated me like I had to show up on time. You know, he was really strict about all of that. And I'm just thinking back to, like, it was accounting, so it wasn't my jam, but at the same time, it was that it was giving me a routine. And then eventually, like, I negotiated with him, and after the pandemic, it was like, okay, I'll come work with you just till noon. But even that, like, working with him till noon gave me that structure of, okay, the morning, like, I know exactly what I'm gonna do, and then in the afternoon I can do my work. I think it gives us that oomph to do our work even
Yeah.
more, because then it's
Yeah.
like, I can't do it in the morning. There's no way I'm going to do it in the morning. I have to do it when I can, because otherwise it leads to regret as well. No, being like, I could have done
Yes.
that, but I didn't.
Yeah, that's true. It's so true. So, just a slight anecdote, maybe my husband is a freelancer. He does his own thing. So usually, on one hand, he has total mastery of his entire schedule, but at the same time, he does say that it does get a little bit overwhelming sometimes when there's so many things you want to do. And you have the whole day, and sometimes you end up just procrastinating and not being able to actually do things. So having that routine, or at least that morning routine, is also something really, I think, essential for developing our discipline, right, to do the other kinds of work that we have to do. So
I love that you brought up discipline as a Virgo, and we are in Virgo season, and Mercury just moved back into Virgo yesterday after being retrograde and then moving back through Virgo, moving into Leo, coming back into Virgo, right? And I feel like discipline, oh my God, that's such a key word. Um, Not even through this season, but I think through the rest of the year, because it's like, I feel like the first half of this year was kind of like, okay, let's see if you got what it takes. Do you have what it takes? And then towards like Mayish became, okay, let me throw you all these heavy things. Let's see what happens. How do you catch it? And then July-ish, I feel like then it shifted and it's like, okay, but how committed are you really?
yeah.
And then I feel like now it's like, okay, but show me that you want it. Like, show me the discipline. So as a Virgo, I'm curious to know, like, I know there's a lot we want to talk about, but as a Virgo, I'm curious to know, um, because you have this like inherently in you, right? So for people, let's say that want to find a little bit more discipline in their lives, how would you suggest to do that? I mean, whether they have a corporate job or not, or if they're just looking to get more discipline to start going for their dreams more seriously, how would you recommend people
um
discipline?
okay, as a Virgo, I have all these different types of lists, right? But I always try to think about the habits also. And it's work even for me. Also, like the habits that I kind of want to develop. So it could be, in these next, and it could change throughout the year as well. Like maybe in the first half of the year, I needed more time to, I wanted to rest and relax a little bit more. So what are the different practices or things that actually allowed me to do that? So let's say it's practicing yoga how many times a week, or maybe it's making myself a slow breakfast and enjoying that. So, and then trying to establish that habit. And you know what they say, that like the 21 day, like to do something every day for 21 days to create a habit. I think it actually really works. So there are all kinds of apps, I think, for people, things like this can be gamified. I used to have and there was also a time when I needed to be able to have more focused time doing my work, because part of my work is actually writing. But I think creatives will understand that sometimes when you're sitting there, it's like you get distracted by so many different things. So I even had an app, and I think it was called a tree. Anyway, the app just allowed you to kind of grow a tree. You grow a tree as you're focusing. So you put it on, so it basically shuts down all the apps on your phone, and it's a tree that's growing. So while I'm writing, and the minimum time is 20 minutes, which is actually a good. And I think a lot of people suggest, or I've read a lot of articles that said, 20 minutes of focus time, and then like a break, and then 20 minutes again, actually works for people to try and develop more focus, more discipline on something. So as a writer, I tried to do that. And after 20 minutes I would see what kind of tree I grew. It could be a cherry tree, and and it appealed to me, I guess. But that helped me kind of see what are my limits also, right? Or boundaries, like how far can I push myself. Maybe 2 hours really makes me go crazy, so it's not good. So you also have to think about what sustains you and what's healthy for you, because when you want to develop a habit, it's something that you want to enjoy doing, right? And maybe eventually enjoy doing. So as much as possible, it's like finding the different ways that could work for you, being creative about that, but trying to stick with the same thing every day. I think one thing that helps is and I'm really just talking about this as a from a writer's perspective, maybe. I read this before where somebody who was writing about writing actually said, if you sit down every single day to write at a certain time, maybe it's like an hour every day, but it's the same time every single day, the muse, like the inspiration, when they come, they will know when and what time to find you. So if you had developed, so for me, it's like, oh, cool. Then, it's really just like setting, I'm available for this to come in at this time. And I think that's pretty great, and a different way to kind of think about it.
I love how you said gamifying it, because then we start challenging ourselves to be like, but can I do it? But
Mm.
can I do it? And so cool for you as someone that's like so close to the environment to see trees growing as you're doing your work. I'm sure that's extra inspiration. And I think I love how you said that. I think it sounds similar to what was mentioned in Big Magic, of how when you create the space, the inspiration comes and it drops in, right? And what I'm thinking about is this, like last few days, I finally got really disciplined with my work, right? Because I'm like, hey, if I'm talking about discipline, if I'm like able to harness the energy of the planets because I know the astrology, then I gotta really get disciplined. Like there's no more playing around, because this feels like the time to really do it. And so I deleted Instagram off my phone for one day, just one day. And I sat on my laptop and I like decided that I wanted to compartmentalize my Instagram accounts. I created content calendars for each of those accounts.
Oh.
And I had like so many bullet points and I had so much work done. And I was like, wow, all it really is taking ourselves out of the way of distraction and allowing ourselves time to be like, okay, here's your space. And something like gamifying it makes us like it pulls us in more, right? Because then imagine like quitting the app to go to Instagram or quitting the app to go somewhere. You're like, but my tree and but my work. It adds an extra layer of, oh, I should be truer to myself.
And I think that's the kind of energy also that Virgo kind of you harness with Virgo, right? And I mean this in just the very best way. You try and also be kind of, as a Virgo, I have also experienced like the shadow side, which can be competitive and petty and all of that. But having that, challenging yourself, I think that's also a very good like aspect of the disciplinarian type, the disciplinarian archetype of the season, which is, yeah, like, can you do this? How far can you go? And I think that energy, I guess, is stronger as well in this season. So it's a good time to really get those projects kind of started on paper and out the door.
Yes, out the door, whether or not it's perfect. I want to throw that in there really quickly. Just because Virgo loves for it to be perfect, because Virgo knows what perfectionism is. But you know what, you guys, we're in a day and time and place where if we waited for everything to be perfect, then I don't think we would be like sharing anything at all. So that's also something we have to like hop over in our mind. But I want to get into our next topic, which is, but thank you for sharing that. I love this because I don't usually ask whoever I'm interviewing about their sign and what I mean, I ask their signs, but I don't ask like what's a thing that you can share. So I think I want to do this moving forward because you guys are, you have the archetype so alive in you. So it's like you're just speaking about your own experience, and your experience helps. For example, a Leo sun that's pretty used to being like all over the place. You know what I mean? Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is what we actually said would be really interesting is mythologizing our lives. Yeah? Okay, and I love how you worded that because I've never heard that said before. So I'd love if you could just explain that a little bit for anybody listening. What does it mean to do that?
Sure. Where do I start? Maybe, just taking a little bit of a step back. Sometimes we also hear people say, you have to romanticize your life. And I'm sure most of us have actually heard that more, right? Like, and romanticizing your life means kind of finding the beauty in the little things, making sure that you kind of see things through a more positive kind of lens and see what that, and you go about your life, I guess, to use a cliche, like with rose-colored lenses. But I think I realized, and also because I had to live through very difficult times in my own life, and I realized, for example, and this is personal, uh a personal tragedy, for example, right, that happened to me. I lost my younger sister. She was 17 years old. She passed away in a car crash with her boyfriend. So when this experience happened, there was no way I could romanticize something like this, right? It is very painful. It's very real. You see the grief in every person that you come across, in my parents, feeling it very deeply as well because I was very close to her. So I'm the eldest. We're four girls in the family. I'm the eldest. She's the youngest. They always said she was kind of like a version two, but for me it was always like she was the better version because she learned from all her older sisters. But the thing is, I realized there's something wrong about the idea of romanticizing your life when you actually need to be able to develop the resilience and the right kind of wisdom to, I guess, deal with the difficult things. Uh, so when I so luckily for me, while I was going through that time, I had already been introduced kind of to the work of Carl Jung, Jungian psychologist, especially through Clarissa Pinkola Estes because of her book. And I started looking at, I guess, all of these different stories, and really understanding what is myth, right? So mythologizing your life means, when you look at myth, like for example, the Greek myths, most of them are tragedy. But when you kind of look at their stories, look at the stories of these tragic heroes, and you see mythologizing is kind of applying these concepts or the different characters that you see and the different experiences that they have, and seeing a side of yourself in their life, and possibly even, you could see yourself in each character in a Greek story, and say that, well, these people, they are caricatures in the sense that, as their sole characters, but if you see it as a whole, it becomes this whole, and the reason that they've lasted for so long is because it becomes this story that we can all relate to, because we see all these different aspects of these heroes and villains in ourselves. And then I feel like you're able to connect more with the human experience, which is not all roses, right? There is a lot of pain, there can be suffering, but there's also triumph, there's also love, there's also beauty. So for me, I think I just shifted really to thinking about life as, okay, like, which, and it helped me because it helped me to feel less alone. Thinking about, okay, the story of, um I don't know, somebody who was banished, maybe, or like the ugly duckling, for example, is a story where, uh it's a fairy tale for us, right? But when you look at the story from the aspect of trying to mythologize your own life, you could maybe see yourself in the duckling, where he grew up really feeling like he didn't belong in his family, maybe having a mother who was at first also wanting to protect him, but then becomes very ambivalent because of the pressures of people around, and then becomes very dismissive and absent, and then has to go out and find their way, and gets into all of these situations, going with different friends, different friend groups, always trying to find your own community. And it isn't until eventually that the duckling kind of learns to see, himself, herself as this beautiful, unique creature, and only then you get to kind of see your own tribe and find your own tribe. And I think that's a story that a lot of people can relate to. So mythologizing that story just means putting yourself in the shoes of each of, maybe even the ambivalent mother or the ugly duckling, and seeing how do I kind of, in a sense, it kind of gives you a blueprint of um, what are steps that I can take, or maybe even just hope that, okay, if things turned out okay for the ugly duckling, it will too, for me someday. And like being able to find that hope in these stories, and I think that's a beautiful part about it. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story about your sister holding you in grief. And I feel like when we experience grief, we just have so much more honor for everyone else that has experienced grief. So here's me sending you a giant hug.
Yeah, I hug you too.
And okay, so I love what you said about mythologizing instead of romanticizing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with romanticizing. I think it would be really cool to do it in a balance and, know when it's time to romanticize and know when it's time to mythologize. However, I've never heard it like that. And I think it's because it's because we're told so much to romanticize our lives that when things are not okay, we start losing it, numbing out, um, thinking that something is wrong with us because we're romanticizing our lives. And if it's a romance, I mean, what
Yeah,
happens in romantic comedies? They
yeah,
kind of they freak out, as compared to in a myth. Like there's so much going on in a myth, and there are so many different players in the story. And like you said, we can relate with the ugly duckling, but we can also relate to the mother. Maybe in other ways we can also relate to the other ducks that are the ones that leave the ugly duckling out. Um and then we're like, oh wait, we're not just us, we're everything.
for
And
everything.
then we're like you said, we're not alone, we are part of it all. And I think this is a good place to just bring Women Who Run with the Wolves in, because um in the beginning, so I heard like so many women say this is a woman's Bible, gotta read it, so good. And I bought it a few years ago, maybe a couple years ago. And in the beginning I was like, I just can't get myself to get into it. And then I think a few months after I got married, or was it like, it was like 6 months to a year after I got married, I picked it up and I started reading it. And it all just started making sense. And I think that's the way it is with me and books. Like I buy a lot of books, I just keep them at
Yeah.
home, and I know that at a certain point I'm like, okay, you're calling out to me, it's your turn. And so with Women Who Run with the Wolves, I think what slowed me down was the myths, because I was like, okay, I don't know if I want to know the myths, but the way she breaks them down after, I've never seen a writer break myths down that way. And there are so many things that have stayed in my mind from what she wrote based on the way she wrote. Like, for example, one of the biggest things that has stayed in my mind forever is how she says that as women, there will never be enough housework. We can always do housework, but then that's going to take us away from our creativity. And I was like, oh my God, she's right. And I guess because that's what I needed to hear at that time in my life, right? So that's what really stuck. But there are so many things that she talks about that every woman needs to read and needs to know. So, what was the landing of this book with you?
Gosh, yeah. So the book arrived to me really in 2016. So it was at that time I had been engaged to be married, not to my current husband. So to eventually that one was, so it was really a period of my life where I was going through a lot of transition, and also kind of feeling lost, right? Like I was thinking about myself and thinking about, I don't know what my life means. I don't know really who I am. What am I, what am I going for? What is there for me? And thinking about marriage, it's like, who am I going to be like as a wife? Do I even know who I am as a woman, as a person? Um so it was one of my really good friends, somebody that I still keep in touch with. We attended yoga teacher training together and became very close. And of course, I shared with her my doubts, my frustrations, and she told me, there is this book. You know what they I think you've heard that before, like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And that's it's the way with books, I feel also. So like you, I have that habit of also buying books that I'm attracted to, but maybe it's not until like 3 or 4 years later that I even pick it up to read it, because that's when we're ready for it. So anyway, she told me about this book, and I went right away to National Bookstore because I think it was the only store that had it. And the copy, right? Like even when you see it, I'm like, I don't know. It's a mass paperback mass paperback copy. The text is really thin. The pages are really thin. It's like, wow, this looks like it is dense. Right. So I think what happened with me was after that, I actually accepted a job where I taught yoga part time. And it was around this time, I was still living in Makati. My family had a home in Santa Rosa in Laguna, and I accepted a teaching job. I don't know why, once a week in the evenings in a yoga studio in Laguna, which was a sister studio of the one that I was taking my training with. But I said, well, it'll be nice to get out of the city once a week. I don't know, maybe I was trying to escape also and just have some time for myself to think, because at that time we were in the midst of like wedding planning. I was transitioning between jobs, and it was just becoming very overwhelming. So I had this one night a week where I was alone in my family's house, because it was a holiday home really for my parents. So it was really just me in that house by myself. And after class, I would come home and I would read maybe a few pages of the book. But I think when I read, one of the first things that really stuck with me was this concept of like what a wild woman is. So all of my life I've been called wild, but not in that sense, right? When people say, "Oh, she's so wild, she's too talkative, she's too opinionated, she's so much." And when I read the description of this wild woman and how she spoke about, what healthy wild women are, like wolves. And she described how wolves are, they're not lone wolves, they actually live in community, very in touch with the family that they're going to take care of, their own instincts, they know how to protect, they know how to hunt. And I said, gosh, like that does not sound like me at all, but I want to be in that space where I can also be able to nurture others around me, right? Like I think I felt at that moment like and she also talks about it later on in one of the chapters in the book. I felt very starved. Like I realized that my soul felt starved. So I just kept reading, and then, and it's the magic of the book is there are things that will pop out at you. And I've read it maybe almost, well, 2.5 times, so almost finished through my third. But every time I read it, there's always a different thing that I pick up. And I think the first time that I read it, I didn't read all of the stories. There were some stories that spoke to me more than others. But it was really this sense of when she said, so the wolves, I think how that landed was really, and me, I guess I felt very related to the author because she's also an ecologist, so she studies wildlife and how wildlife interact with each other. And that really opened my eyes as well to, there are different ways to see things, like maybe we're taught one way or we're taught one thing, and you realize that, and this is something that I think has kept happening over the last years, is nothing we know is absolutely 100% true all of the time. Something that is true today could be not true at all tomorrow, right? So how do we live with just this kind of world where everything is so volatile and things change all of the time? And I think that's what really landed also for me. And I just, maybe I'll just leave it at, one of the things she also said is there are as many ways to be wild as there are women in the world. And just for me, that really kind of hit home and said, I really have to figure out, really, like, who am I? What have I held back? What have I tried to repress because either, society or my fiance at the time, or anything else that even I imposed on myself, right? This, I guess we call it, and I didn't have a word for this back then, limiting beliefs, right? You have these judgments of yourself that I can be this and this, but only that, and nothing more, maybe, but also nothing less. So you hold yourself to these expectations, and there's no room for fluidity, for change, for stories to take a turn, and for you to decide that I'm going to take my story somewhere, somewhere else. This story doesn't work for me anymore. I'm gonna embark on a new one, a new adventure, and I have the power to be able to do that. So I think that's how it all started for me, and it's a love affair that's continued until now. um but again, this was in 2016, so it's been so long, and I think even now when I read it, there are other things that come up for me that didn't at that time, because I'm also a changing person. So
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, as you're talking, first of all, like when you said there are as many ways to be wild as there are women in the world, that she said, I think that's so beautiful. And I think more women need to know that, because uh, this damn demure mindful thing, man, the trend of being demure and being mindful, and it's driving me crazy. It's driving me crazy because
yeah.
if we're demure, are we also wild? But in our last heart space, which is on Saturday, we actually talked about paradoxes. So maybe we can be both demure and wild, but we're leaving a part out of the equation. Like, this is what always ends up happening. We engage in one part, but we leave the other part out, and then that part of us ends up feeling starved. Like you said, like your soul felt starved. My soul felt starved when I was reading it too. And then I saw it and I was like, oh my God, these are all the ways I'm not being true to myself. And an image that I can't get out of my head is the skeleton woman. The skeleton woman just being like crossed over. And I'm just imagining us before we find ourselves as like just a lump of bones, just like completely tangled. And then we don't know who we are and we don't know what we're doing. And we're engaging in hustle culture, and we're putting like all these requirements of ourselves, and we don't even remember who we were as kids, and we're not even telling our story anymore. Like, there's so much there in what you just said. And another thing I was thinking about was um yeah, that there is so much to our stories that we're forgetting to share, or forgetting to feel, or forgetting to remember, because we're trying to keep up with trends, because we're trying to hook the algorithm. Like something I was talking about with one of my friends, I think it was Saturday. So I sat with her and I'm like, okay, here's my Instagram profile. Can you critique it? And so she critiqued it for me, because I asked her, right? Please tell me what you think. And she's like, girl, you need to tell your story. There is nothing about your story here. Like, and she's my childhood friend, so she knows a lot about my life. And she's like, there's so much from your childhood that you can bring up that you're not talking about. And I was like, oh, wow, because I've been so into how can I hook the damn algorithm, I'm forgetting to even share, like, who am I? What is my story? What are our stories? What makes us wild? What makes us demure? And that, like, for that matter, you know what I mean? Like, what makes us all that we are? And I feel that reading myths allows us to kind of identify who we are again when we've forgotten who we are, especially when we've blocked it out of our minds, especially because of trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, a lot of it is remembering, right? And honoring as well. And I think a lot of us, just with the, like, even with, let's say, even with grief, right? It's like the world expects you to have kind of like a timeline. We've put even like a, these are the different stages of grief, and you go through these. But I think, as anybody who has experienced it, right, it is a lifelong thing. It's a cycle that repeats itself, and it's something that you just have to live with. But we have not really put in place structures now within our community to allow for grief to actually unfold the way it should unfold. My sister was telling me just the other day, my other sister, she lives in New Zealand now, and she was saying, talking about benefits, she's about to take her first job. So now she's kind of looking at what are the different benefits that you should have. And as somebody who's experienced and is experiencing some grief also in her life, right, she messaged and she said, can you believe this one company, like, your bereavement leave is 2 days? Take 2 days, what do they expect you? And I said, literally, that is the time it takes to plan maybe a funeral or some emergency, services. But then she said, and they expect you to come back to work right after. I said, right? It doesn't make sense. If you really look at it, it's ridiculous. But that's something that not really a lot of people also really think about, and us, like, we're guilty of it as well, unless it's something that you've experienced or have seen, or then you live through. Then it's, gosh, like, you just kind of wake up to the different ways that we're not making the space for the whole breadth of, like, human experience. And sometimes it gets kind of ridiculous just imagining it.
Oh, that's very real, and that's crazy. 2 days is freaking wild because that's not even enough time to plan the funeral. That's enough time, I feel like, to not even, that's not enough time for anything. But that's the amount of time for you to like face like, oh my God, this just happened.
Yeah.
And not to mention the reverberating shocks, okay? That goes on for months and probably years. So I don't know what the heck you can get from 2 days, but that's absolutely insane. And I agree, like we're guilty. I'm guilty of it too, because I'm thinking like, okay, now I have to start showing up properly. Like I enough of being sad. But then I also have my days where I'm like, but I'm a paradox. I'm sad and I'm happy and I'm
Can be
showing
both.
up. Yeah, we can be both. And I'm showing up in honor of him and I'm showing up to create for him. And I think once we start looking, like for me, the biggest thing that grief, and I want to know your insight as well. For me, the biggest thing that came from grief is how can I follow my joy so so loudly, like that's all I want to do, follow my joy. Because once mortality is put in our face and it's like this is it, like it's reduced to this. Like I'm just thinking about like when we went to India to disperse my dad's ashes, and like it's this whole human, like such a big personality, and then all of a sudden it's like ashes. Um and that's like, fuck, we're alive for, we don't even know, we, in my poems I like to say we're alive for 100 years, but we could be alive for 20 years, we could be alive for 16 years, we could be alive for 10 years, we don't even know. And I think when I was faced with mortality, that was my thing. It was like, okay, now how can I just do everything that makes me happy and just share everything that I can while I am alive? Because I
Yeah.
think that's what life is. It gives us the vessel to actually share things with people, because I deeply believe that our family that have transitioned are still here, and we
Yeah.
can still feel them and we can still communicate with them in a very different way, of course. Um, but yeah, how about for you? What is the one thing that grief made you do like immediately?
Definitely. I think for me it was when my sister passed away, and in the beginning, in the first few months, like, we had so many pictures to share, memories to share, so all of it kind of came out. And conversations that you had, or the thing that you remember is like, when was the last time that I spoke with her, and what did I say when we spoke to each other, right? And I think that the thing for me is like, coming faced with this mortality, like, for me it's like, in a way it's the same as yours, where you wanted to follow your joy. For me it was, don't be scared to experience life, or to actually say what it is that you're feeling, and express what it is that you're feeling. So, for me it was, if you love your family, tell them that you love them. If there's a person that you want to make amends with, do it. There's no better time. And I think and if there's something that you want to do, kind of, it's not really YOLO, but it's more of just like putting things into perspective and saying like, what am I waiting for? Right. And there's so much, I think there's so much beauty in life as well that just needs to be experienced. And sometimes I feel like when my sister died, I felt like a lot of my own life, like maybe I had been holding myself back again because of this, you know, can't feel too much, can't say too much, you can't cry at every commercial, milk commercial that you see on TV, you can't. But then after that I was like, so what, like if I wanted to dance on the street because I felt like it, I'll do it. If I wanted to sing and I don't know how to sing, I'll still do it. And it's this, and yeah, in a way it really is following your joy, because, or at least release it, unleash it into the world and be able to share it. And this fact that we are, we're talking about being paradox, like for me also at the time that my sister died, and for me it's like, how can I feel this sad but also feel so much maybe love and happiness when I'm with certain people or when I'm experiencing certain things. And it can be both. So for me it was also an expansion, I guess, of my heart space, my own heart space, and saying I am actually capable of holding all of these feelings together. And none and all of them are very valid. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I think it gives a lot of perspective, right? When we talk to different people that have experienced um, not the same thing, but that have experienced loss.
Mm.
Because then we kind of understand, I don't know, we just get to understand each other better. We understand the nature of life better. And, we realize it's okay. Like everything is okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to cry. It's okay to dance on the street. It's okay to yell your favorite song out of the car window. It's all okay. And I think it's courage. It's us finding the courage within ourselves, and it's them giving us the courage that they had while they were alive, probably. And it's the people, I don't know if you resonate with this, but I may have mentioned this in one of the podcasts. But something that really surprised me, of course, not in a very deep way, but anyway, something that really surprised me is how when people send us messages and they're like, I'm sending you so much strength and I'm sending you so much love. I got so many of the, like, we get so many of those messages, right? And what's so cool is I actually felt the strength. Like, it's just typing a message being like, I'm sending you so much strength. But when it comes to us, it's like, oh my God, they actually did send me the strength. I actually have, like we had to do 12 days of, I'm sure we had to do different things in honor of our family, but we had to do 12 days of prayer, like coming back every day, wearing white. Everyone's wearing white. It's like, oh my God. But I had the courage and I had the strength and I was able to do it. And I can tell you that wasn't me. Like 100%, that wasn't me. That was so many forces, plus God, plus the universe, all coming in to be like, hey, you're still alive. And
Yeah.
that's your gift.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. Like it's crazy because then we're like, oh my God, I am still alive. Now what am I gonna do with this life?
Yes.
Ugh. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for talking to me about this. I think it's important work and it's deep work. And okay, let's weave this into the way wild woman handles emotions.
Mm. I love that one. I think for this specific question, I really have to go back to the story of Vasalisa, which is in Women Who Run with the Wolves, and we come across this character who is Baba Yaga, and Baba Yaga is really, we know her in fairy tales as this fearsome old witch hag, and usually she's portrayed as somebody like very, very old, very wizened, sometimes very ugly and very scary. But she represents really kind of the crone, the woman who has seen it all, experienced it all, and is holding all of this in within her, and it's terrifying and awesome, and there's wisdom, but there's also a lot of intimidation, right, coming into it. But I feel like it is a rite of passage that each woman should go and be able to meet Baba Yaga. Or when I say Baba Yaga, when I say go and meet your Baba Yaga, it's really feel kind of the depth of your emotions and the range really that can feel it, and relating it maybe to the time when my so for me it's my when my relationships ended, and I've had like quite a few as well serious breakups, the end of a relationship, and it's always really a time of loss, right? So some people say, you're so dramatic or melodramatic, and I get into like this really big funk for maybe, I don't know, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 2 months, it really depends. But for me it's like I feel like you need to feel it all as soon as it comes, and just know that it's nothing lasts forever, really, right? Everything changes. And just know that for whatever it is, whatever you're feeling, it's not permanent. It will eventually move. So especially with emotions, right? Like waves. So I'm bringing a little bit of astrology back into this. I'm a Pisces moon, so my emotions are just always big all the time when they come. And for me, one of the ways that I had to learn really was to accept that I would have all these big emotions, and I would have different ways of expressing these emotions, that all of them are valid, but not all of them needed to stay, right? And I actually had the power to also kind of choose how I acted from that. So I think Wild Woman, Baba Yaga, and being able, like, how do we hold emotions is just, that's the beauty of, I think, being a woman as well, is that we have this entire, our biology, our physiology also allows us to feel kind of this whole range of emotions. And people say they're not affected by the moon, but that's not, I don't think that's real at all, because nature is affected by the moon. Turtles, salmon, plankton know that that they come out when the moon is out, that animals come out to mate when the moon is full. So we're not any different, right? We're the same. So for me it's really like knowing these range of emotions and being able to kind of hold it all, I think, is something that we should be proud of as women. So I think the way, as a wild woman, I think one of the ways that you become actually wild is when you become attuned and welcome and are able to hold and honor the different emotions that you go through as an individual.
I find it interesting that you said that, there are some people who say that they're not affected by the moon, and for everyone that says that, I present to you the cycle of a woman and the cycle of the moon. They're exactly the same. They're both 29 days. Also, I present to you a fact that one of my astrology teachers shared with me, that one of her friends from the LAPD said that they put out more cops on full moons because there are more chances of an accident or for something to go down on a full moon. So for everybody who says, I don't believe that our cycles align with the moon, or who say that astrology is not real, when people say I don't believe in astrology, I love to say, but it's a language. Would you ever say I don't believe in Tagalog or I don't believe in Spanish? No way in hell. Like, I would say I don't understand the language. I wouldn't say I don't believe in it.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite way to reframe it, because I think it's gotten a very like woo woo context, but it's not woo woo at all. If we're on a spinning ball. And there are spinning balls around us, and naturally the spinning balls around us have an effect on our spinning ball, is what I feel. So thank you for bringing in your Pisces moon too, because I feel you. I see that. I have Venus and Mercury in Cancer, so totally resonating with your Pisces moon and all of those emotions. And like, it's so important that whether or not other people tell us that what we're feeling is valid or not, we need to have a space that we create for ourselves to feel these emotions. This is making me think of Virginia Woolf and her book title, A Room of One's Own. Um, we all need, like, I mean, I want to say not even just women, like everyone needs a room of their own to go into. And when I say room, like, I mean a metaphorical room, a spiritual room that we go into to carve out the space, even if it means like we're imaginary, like imaginarily digging sand up to go sit in the bottom of the sand for a bit. We need to have that. And I think a lot of times we may judge ourselves for it because we may be like, I'm being over dramatic, shouldn't feel it this much. I've been told that I'm too much, maybe I am too much. But just honoring that we never are too much. Maybe we're just being our own flavor of wild woman.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think, just to add to it, there is that aspect of being able to find that space within yourself to process, to just to retreat into, right? And that reminds me actually of the story of seal skin, soul skin, which is really the way that she put it into words is really, how do you go home? And when women go home, we go inwards and into ourselves. And home doesn't need to be, or home doesn't need to be an expensive place that you travel to. It really is just like you said, like a room within yourself, that you can retreat to process and to have this. I think the only thing that I wanted to add was that this is also why I feel, or for me, it was the drive to kind of create and look for the community. So, look for the space to actually hold these women's circles. And the only reason that I hold the circles for women is because as a woman, that's the experience that I have, right? And I do believe that equally, men as well, and everybody really needs to have these kind of spaces where you can really just unfold and let yourself kind of be. And I think another thing from the Women Who Run with the Wolves book that really stuck with me was when Clarissa, the author, she said, a long time ago, one of the ways really that we took care of each other as community, and it just happened naturally, or even, it's how language developed, was when women needed to do things together, like their chores, taking care of their community. So they would sit together to do something, and they needed to be coordinated, but also having this practice of actually sitting together and being together so that things can unfold. It could be, the image that sticks with my mind is that famous painting of women doing I think it's an Amor Solo painting, where women are doing laundry by the river. And for me, it's like these kinds of spaces, especially for us, I think, living in cities, living in, you could be in a corporate atmosphere, but you could really just be living in this modern world, and there are very rarely spaces for women, for people to just gather, right? And for me, it's like, how is that possible? It seems to be such an essential thing that we have taken for granted. And I think for us being South Asian, we're a little bit more lucky because we still have very strong familial structures. When you have family gatherings, your families can be very close knit. But if you kind of take a look at the, sometimes maybe in a Western kind of context, individualism and like going your own thing, at the end of the day, who do you have really other than your husband or your immediate family? And it becomes like a very isolated kind of unit. But we do need this wider community to be ourselves with. Like for me, it's like, I love my husband. I also love my friends that I grew up with, my social friends, but they're also are different circles, right? That we actually need to become. And I guess that's also the thing, like, we, as paradoxes, we can exist with all these different likes, interests, things. And you also need to be able to take care of your soul, and then maybe there's a community for you to do your soul work with. And I have found that circles really, or at least having that community of women, is very healing and fulfilling. And healing happens quite a lot faster if you do it collectively, because then you feel, I'm heard, I'm seen, even if they don't really understand, but they are holding me in their hearts. And then it just really helps you so much.
So one thing I want to bring in when you were talking about the Western way of, individualism, I'm thinking about how when I studied in the States, my dad told me you have a year to work after, and then you have to come back home. And every time I would tell my friends in the States that, they would be like, but it's your life. Why do you have to listen to him? And that brought me like two sides within myself being like, okay, so should I listen to me or should I listen to him? But he's my dad, and my whole life I've listened to him. How can I not? Da 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 da. That was my whole time that I spent in the States, which was 3 years. I was thinking about maybe I should move home, maybe I should stay there. I mean, I'm a Libra rising, so there was a lot of like back and forth. But that's the story that it brings up for me, right? Because in my heart, like being brought up South Asian, um, it's been very much like family is important. You got to be around who you care. Versus over there, it's all about growing yourself, growing as an individual. There's nothing wrong with that. That creates a whole different life for ourselves. But also, like, how much more precious is it when we do have people around us? That's the first thing. The second thing is, I cannot even compare the energy that I feel after after a podcast recording and after like gathering with women in like heart space or back in the day expansive space to anything in the world. Like these conversations are soul food, and more women need to be having these conversations, because what's taught to us by the patriarchy is a lot of like women against women, and
Yeah.
we've seen that for so long, and that's still in the media, and that's still what's being promoted, and a lot of us still, maybe we have beliefs that cling to that. Maybe we don't want to be that way, but it's ingrained, and we have to kind of break that to like get past it. And I think this is how we're breaking it. This is how we're going past it. We're building communities where we can actually see the beauty in women. And then I think, do you know what's insane is once we see the beauty in women through the communities that we're building, we even start to see the beauty in women that we at one point were judging.
Yeah,
It ripples. It's crazy.
it does.
Ripples. And I think it's super important for every single man and woman, but woman, to have a space to be seen and to be held and to be uplifted by women. Because just like you, like I love my husband so much, but he will not understand me
Yes, of course.
the same way that, let's say, a woman that I've like spoke to forever will understand me. It's a very different frequency, and it's not even about the person, it's about the biology and the literal makeup. And okay, so that's what I want to say for that. And to just finish the topic on women who run with the wolves, because I really want to know about your favorite books before we close. I want to just open a page and see if, like, find a
Yeah.
message, see what comes up. Okay, hold on. Ooh, okay, this is a page where I have so many underlines, so I don't know which underline to choose. Um, let's do this. To avoid being the little match girl, there is one major action you must take. Anyone who does not support your art, your life, is not worth your time. Harsh but true. Let's go with that.
I love that one. It's very Virgo as well, right?
Yes. And Leo and Virgo, it's like anyone who doesn't support your art, anyone who doesn't support your soul, bye. Like, that doesn't mean cut ties with them, but that means don't give them as much importance in your brain. Like, they're living rent free in your brain, which is limiting you from creating your art, which is absolutely unnecessary.
I love that.
So that's our little quote from Women Who Run with the Wolves. Now, Nikki, I love the books that you share on your story. I know that we've read some similar books as well. And I told you before we recorded that I would love for you to share some of your favorite books that you think have like a beautiful message and that people should probably check out, or just like what you've loved and what are your favorite messages from these books.
Sure. Yeah, so I was actually, just to say, I was actually having a really hard time trying to think about books, limiting the books, just because I have so many favorites. And you can tell me a genre, and I'll probably give you an entire list. So what I've done is really more of I have some of them actually here with me. What I did was maybe just some of the books like in recent years that have really made an impact on me. And helped me to really think about the world maybe through different lenses, let's say through different lenses. So I'll share three. The first one is really this book. It's called, and you can see like I have all these things. The labels actually are all labels for different things where I get to use it. The book is called Rooted. And the subtitle is Life at the Crossroads of Science, Nature, and Spirit. And for me, as somebody who works kind of in the liminal spaces of, I work really in the business world, but I have to think in terms of, for example, climate science. How do you relate information to people? But then there's also nature, where you feel everything as an ecologist, and spirit, which is soul. um the thing for me is really like, how do we ground ourselves really in the different realities? The different, I like what you said about astrology being a language, because I do feel that each of these, like science is a language of its own, and it shows a certain way of looking at the world, or actually relating with the world. And it is the same thing for me with, there's a whole argument about science and spirituality, right? And how the two will never ever go together. But for me, spirituality and all these different traditions, wisdom traditions, are also different ways of relating with the world and seeing ourselves in the world. So I think the book really just is a for me, it was a very easy read, like a practical read as to how do we start and look at our daily lives, and what are the different practices that we can incorporate to actually start feeling. Most of us, we are scared to think about or to even talk about spirituality, and maybe, because either we don't want to be judged about our faith, or we just feel like, oh, I don't really believe in any of that stuff. But I think every single person is spiritual, right? And how do we actually connect that, and how do we see it in action in the world around us, and relate as well with different people? So that's one. So this is that first book. Yeah, so it's written actually by somebody who is also, she's a philosophist, like an eco philosophist. So she really is trying to help people kind of think, because when we think about ourselves and nature, we think of ourselves as separate from nature most of it, and we've been taught that, right? And sometimes even in religion, some religions were taught that you have, um what's the word, dominance over all of creation. And maybe that's a language that needs to die already, and we need to change, and we need to. And for me, it's, finding the words, because words for me are magic, like they bring reality, right? So how do you find the words to actually bring this new imagination, this new kind of world into being? So that's one.
Spirituality, you said everyone's spiritual. I agree, because we all have spirits. I mean, at the end of the day, if we have a spirit, how could we not be spiritual? Like maybe we don't believe we're spiritual based on the definition that other people give it, but we can give it our own definition. So you said you love words. I love how you said that, because I love words and I love definitions. Like that's my biggest thing lately. And that's why I created the space that I created, Heart Space, because we're going into different words and redefining them for ourselves. Because a dictionary can tell us what a dictionary can tell us, but a dictionary cannot tell us a definition that actually has resonance within our own bodies. So words, man, those are spells. And to have a book with words that are like so beautifully strung together, I think that's magic. Go
And
on.
it's medicine, right? Yeah, so the second book that I have is also, it's really as well, it's called Culture. So it's a new world history, and this is really something that I found myself like coming back to this past year. What it is really is, the author just shows, so reading from the back is, can anyone really own a culture? So this account argues that the story of global civilizations is one of mixing, sharing, and borrowing. And it really, for me, it shows just how many things we actually share with the rest of the world. So you know how there's this whole thing now about cultural appropriation, and how people are so insistent, like with the practice, yoga practice, for example, which is something that I do. Like I feel like, is this something that I'm appropriating from a very old wisdom tradition that I am not even authorized by certain, if certain people don't think I'm authorized to teach it or to talk about it. And it's the same. So it's really like how things have evolved from history and interactions between people like, Marco Polo and people in when he arrived in China, and how you would take certain technologies and decide this is something I want to adapt. It's the same also with stories. Um, there's one story here that I really love, and it's about uh, the Christian the Christian tradition, or at least how it was practiced at that time, and how it surfaced in Ethiopia after the Queen of Sheba. And this story is popular in the Bible, but after, so the Queen of Sheba was apparently like a princess, like a very dark-skinned queen from Africa, who goes into King Solomon's palace, and King Solomon falls in love with her, but eventually she decides to actually go back home, and she steals kind of the tablets, which are the sacred kind of tablets where Moses had written the Ten Commandments, and it's sealed in that structure that they have, right, the Jewish kind of tabernacle. And she steals it and brings it to Ethiopia. And I love how this story is the story that people from Ethiopia carry as to how Christianity became adopted. It's probably, maybe some of it is true, maybe some of it isn't, but it kind of shows just how do we evolve different stories to make it suit us. So, like, or not to make it suit us, but to so that we relate to it. And it's the same with, I've always been going back to myth, right? For example, um the Greek myths, which and the Greek gods, the Greek heroes, which came before, and how suddenly I've always been curious about how why there's a Roman god equivalent, right? So if there's a Zeus, there's a Jupiter. I'm not so familiar with the Roman gods, but essentially it's all the same gods with the same kind of powers, but they have different names. And I read in this book about how the Romans eventually, when they had to start their new empire, when they needed new stories, they needed their own heroes. So they took from the Greek mythology, the Greek myths, they took certain aspects of the Greek myths, they changed maybe some of the characteristics, like maybe they would uplift the characteristics of Apollo, who's the sun god, who really created, and that helped to set kind of the mindset of the culture of the civilization that they tried to encourage, they tried to propagate. And for me, it opened my eyes to kind of, oh my gosh, then you see all these different influences. Then when you look at your own reality, and I think for me, as a Filipino, you kind of have this sense of, maybe there's an identity crisis for a lot of Filipinos, like who are we? Maybe should we go back to like pre-colonial times, but who were we in pre-colonial times? We don't really know. But then for me, it's allowed me to kind of just look at, well, we are who we are. We are pieces of each of these cultures, like the Spanish culture, maybe even and the Japanese culture, even if they were here for like 2 years, we took some practice, and American culture for sure. When they arrived, we took some of these pieces, and now it's part of who we are. It's our reality. How do we move from there? So it helps, and it's a lot of, just for me, it's like stories from around the world that you see things about. The he talks here about the story as well of the, I'm sure you've seen it, the Japanese wave. It's a very famous kind of art painting, and where it started and how it became propagated as a very famous, like almost, it's like something you see in restaurants as an image, and it shows you like how did it develop to become this woodblock art that has been replicated by so many people around the world. So yeah, I think it's great. It's called Culture.
That's really cool. I want to read that book because I've always associated as a third culture kid. So I was born in the States. I have lived here my whole life, but I am 100% Indian. So I've never really known where to identify myself. And when I lived in the States, um, like there was this whole question of where do I even belong? Because I was born in the States. So yeah, I kind of felt like I was from there. And then I really feel Filipina. Like at my heart, I'm Filipina because yes, I look Indian, but I mean, I can speak Tagalog more than I can speak Hindi or Sindhi. But whenever I go out here, they're like, "Where are you from?" Right? And I speak in Tagalog, and they're like, "Ay, marunong ka pala mag-Tagalog." And then I'm like, "Okay, then that makes me feel like I'm not from here." And then I go to India, and I can't speak the language there, so I sure as hell don't belong there. So it's so fascinating because then it becomes okay, but then where am I from? And then from what you said, like actually nobody is from one place at all. Everybody is from a combination of different places, whether or not your blood is like, you probably have like full Filipino blood, yeah?
Yeah.
And you're from here and you're still saying like we have all of these different parts of us. So I
Uh,
think it's normal for every human, no matter whether you're mixed, no matter whether you're from different places, like to feel like I don't know where I belong. And yeah, I want to read this book because when I was in the States, I wrote a blog post and I wrote culture, but I wrote cult dash sure because it felt a lot like a cult. And the reasoning behind this was uh, I'm from a part of India called Sindh, which is now a part of Pakistan. And so we're called Sindhis. And the rule was I had to marry someone Sindhi, only a Sindhi. So at that time, I was like, this is very cult-like, and I don't get why. So I'm really interested to read culture. Okay,
yeah,
what's next?
a really good book. The last one I don't have a physical copy of, but it was one of the books that I read right after Women Who Run with the Wolves because I got really interested in the work of Carl Jung. And I know that he's a, as a psychologist, a lot of his publications, they really feel very academic. But one of his books that I really love is Man and His Symbols. And essentially, it also opened my eyes. I think for many of us who are interested in like esoteric work, like tarot, astrology, reading this book, getting to read this book gives you also a better like this sense of just how many symbols and images are alive in the world around us that we don't necessarily are aware of. But then becoming aware of it kind of gives you an extra lens, I guess, to see the world. You're able to pay more attention to the messages in things. And it gives us, for me, I just felt that it helped me really in my practice in my own practice of like divination. And when I say divination here, it's really seeing the meaning or the subcontext of things that are around you, that are happening around you, right? And it's an extra, I wouldn't even say it's an extra power, but it's something that innately we all have within us because people, humans have always been meaning making creatures. And but it's amazing to me to kind of see what images are kind of passed down through our DNA, through our genetics, and are alive within us. And it's really, like he talks in the book about certain dreams that people have, and these could be people who are from different parts of the world. But then when they talk about these different dreams and then eventually have to make the meaning of the dreams, the images. So this is actually how the archetypes were born, right? So like the archetype of the mother, the archetype of the king, the queen, the princess. And it's an interesting, if we just go down this rabbit hole, I think there's an article I also read recently about like why is like the archetype of the princess is not so present in the world anymore. And exploring really what are the different, like why is this so, like like I think a lot, like the princess archetype seemed to have died with Princess Diana when she died in 1997, they say. But they say, what's the reason for that in society, and what are the different, what are there new archetypes that are being born because of the newer ways that we are interacting with the world and with other people around us. So then you kind of see that, oh my gosh, again, it's realizing the how alike we are to each other as human beings, and how amazing it really just is, like the mind is to create these different images, that the subconscious is. So if we could be more closer in touch with our own with our own sides, like the understand ourselves more, the archetypes that are alive within our own selves, then we are able to relate better with people. And maybe that's the way that we can actually move towards peace. Maybe I'm a romantic, but because compassion, like you said, when like for us it's the experience of maybe grief and loss, it connects you, but there are other human experiences as well, right? That eventually you don't have to experience yourself, but you learn to relate with others better.
Ooh, I'm curious. I'm so curious to see the new archetypes that come out from today's day and age and the way that we relate to each other as like in contrast to queen, king, princess, which is really actually not used as much anymore. And we'll round up here in a very little bit, but I just want to say I see how it's no longer a big thing. Like princess, we're all being taught to be queens, like by our own minds and by women if we're surrounding ourselves with huge women, or maybe even kings,
Yeah.
like we are kings and queens. We don't even need to be princesses or damsels in distress. That's such a thing of the past. So I'm really interested to see how um this changes in time. And I have that book and I've read half of that book up to
Mhm.
where Carl Jung wrote. And I love how you said um, images are passed down from our DNA. And I think that's just such a cool concept. Like having never seen something, but
Yeah.
our
Und-
DNA just recognizes it so deeply, like in our bones. That's crazy. The human experience is such a trip. And I think we've covered so much of the human experience through this one conversation. So thank you for thank you for going through the waves with me. We've gone a lot of places and thank you also for your time and for spending time with me. And to round this up, I'd love to know two things. What makes you a artist and where can people find you and how can they work with you?
Ooh, I love the first question. I don't know. I think it's really, we were talking today about being a Virgo, having all that discipline, and it actually took me a while to also, because I really super related with the archetype of what disciplinarian Virgo kind of perfectionist really is. It took a lot of work for me to actually unfold and try to see my creative side and try to let also my emotions be more free flowing. So I think for me it's really being able to kind of hold all of these emotions, but also be able to have the discipline to and the words to be able to express them and share them with the world. And that's really because when you do this, when you do this kind of work, creative work, it always has to lead with the heart, right? What you feel, um the spectrum of emotions, whether it's joy, it's grief, and it's being able to sit with that and share it with the world. um yeah, where to find me? I am on Instagram, pretty active. As my personal account is Earthchild, so that's double E and double D. But for the community work and for anybody who's interested really in like women's circles, more about women who run with the wolves, we do have the community account. It's Wild Woman Rising PH. So we do have a website, but it's still under revision right now, so it will be up soon. But Instagram is the way to go, I think.
That's perfect. Thank you. As you answered what makes you a artist, I was thinking about your description of Baba Yaga and the way you explain to go into emotions as a wild woman. And I think that in itself makes you such a beautiful artist. So thank you for sharing your heart with us. And it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.